Wow, what a year for Giancarlo Stanton. Didn't get to 60, but I'd say 59 is pretty darn good. Tied with Anthony Rendon for the highest WAR in the National League, according to Fangraphs. But the NL MVP race is still wide open. Our insiders are here to make their case for some of the top candidates, starting with Clay Ferraro and Giancarlo.
You know, it's really hard to argue against Paul Goldschmidt when it comes to MVP when you see him on a day-in, day-out basis. I know that Giancarlo Stanton has the home runs, and some other players have some really good offensive numbers as well. But what Goldschmidt brings, not just when we're talking about hitting, what he does at the plate, those numbers are obvious, but his base running. I know he's not stolen as many bases this year as last year, and in large part because teams are holding him closer because they realize how dangerous he is on the base paths. He's a very good base runner, going first to third. His defense is Gold Glove caliber. So you add in all the different factors, whether it's his offensive numbers, his Gold Glove caliber defense, his base running, his leadership, and he's just a complete player. And again, I'm taking nothing away from some of the other candidates in there, particularly Stanton. Just when you see Goldschmidt on a day-in, day-out basis and see his consistency and what he brings to the table, it's hard to argue against him.
Well, you start with something that's very un-MVP-like, and that's defense. Nolan Arenado is the best defensive third baseman in baseball by a wide margin. He's perhaps the best defensive player in baseball. He's just uncanny at third base. That gives him value. That gives the pitchers more confidence to throw to contact. And so that's a very, very, very valuable point that isn't on the stat sheet. On the stat sheet, he just became the first third baseman in Major League history to drive in 130 or more runs in 3 consecutive seasons. He hit 300 for the first time in his career. He had a great season in the clutch. He did everything an MVP needs to do to take his team to the playoffs.
Anthony Rendon, a consistent guy for this Nationals team. 147 games he's played in, hit over 300, 25 home runs, over 100 driven in. And I think, too, getting it done on the defensive end, too, for me, for Rendon. Another consistent guy. We talk about this team having a lot of guys that show up and post up for work every day, night in and night out. And Rendon doesn't have maybe the name, the star power on this offense, on this Nationals lineup, but he's a guy that's there for you, getting it done on the field and at the plate as well, a guy you can count on. And again, a guy who played 147 games for this team who has dealt with some injuries throughout the year, but one of the consistent things has been Anthony Rendon. And, you know, like I said, maybe not the name, the star power, but the numbers are there for sure.
Giancarlo Stanton should be the National League most valuable player, and that's not just me saying that because I'm down here in South Florida. I think it's one of those years where you look around and there is not one dynamite candidate on any playoff team that jumps out and you say, okay, that guy has to win this award. So in that circumstance, I think you have to step back and say, okay, who has been the best player? I understand that the phrase most valuable it's very subjective, and a lot of people would say, okay, if a team doesn't make the playoffs or even make a significant run at the postseason, then how can any player on that team be valuable? Watching Giancarlo Stanton and what he's done game in and game out to carry this team, and they have a good lineup, but there is no pitching staff there. The starting pitching has been very, very tough to try to compensate for in that lineup. And Giancarlo Stanton has almost single-handedly kept this team afloat most of the season. I think without a doubt he's the most valuable player this year.
My pick for the NL MVP is Giancarlo Stanton, and I know I'm going to hear a lot of flack for this. Charlie Blackmon is having a great year. Nolan Arenado, Paul Goldschmidt, even Joey Votto is having a tremendous year. But 59 home runs and over 130 RBIs on the season is pretty much unheard of. We haven't seen that in quite some time. If you guys that are into WAR, Baseball Reference, he's number 1 in WAR, and also the Fangraphs, he's number 1 in WAR. So, and I know he put up all these numbers on a bad team, but to me, that is more of a reason why Giancarlo should be National League MVP, because they could easily pitch around him, but they didn't. This guy deserves to be the National League MVP.